your source for everything paranormal. Para X.
Missed an episode of Stirring the Cauldron? Then be sure to check out marlabrooks.com and check out the archive. And while you're there, check out Marla's weekly Witches Oracle card reading. Explore the site to find many great resources, such as information on tarot, oracle readings, metaphysical consultations, and links to all of Marla's books. That's marlabrooks.com.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, Merry Meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the ParaX Radio Network. Tonight we're going to be talking tarot with Juno Lucina, and she's got a brand new deck out that's different than the regular decks in that it's a healing deck, a spiritual study of what each tarot card says about health from an astrological, Kabbalistic, archetypal, I never say that word right, and traditional perspective. The cards focus on the lessons tarot offers about health, diet, fitness, and wellness. Now, Juno is the creator of the Kingdom Within Tarot deck and author of The Alchemy of Tarot, Practical Enlightenment through the Astrology, Kabbalah, and the Archetypes of Tarot. She's also an Empress by design and a star by nature. Ever fluid and changing, Juno is more a verb than a noun, more an introduction than a conclusion. She wishes that all awaken from Vishnu's dream to see the truth and embrace all that is. She's also just a story pointing the way. We're going to do a lot of pointing today, Juno. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
We're going to do pointing and enlightening because it is interesting that a deck is strictly for that, because there are cards in the deck that sort of in a regular tarot deck that can be turned into medical meanings or physical things. But I ran into a website a while back that had medical interpretations for the different cards, but it actually seemed like someone just kind of gave random meanings to each card with no particular thought behind it, and it wasn't any kind of a guideline that I would even consider using because it seemed so amateurish and kind of got to me thinking that it might do more harm than good. But for those who aren't familiar with tarot, I know that the Magician card, for example, has some sorts of medical connotations inferring surgery, injections, but if you take the Hanged Man, for example, or Death at first glance, they would obviously be uh-oh cards if you were asking for a medical meaning. So how did maybe you should talk a little bit about the genesis of the cards and then how you determined the meanings for the deck.
Okay. I have a pretty extensive background in tarot that comes from quite an eclectic study of different spiritual traditions. So when I did the Kingdom Within Tarot and the book that was a broader study of tarot, the Alchemy of Tarot, my goal was to actually come up with a deck and then a book that would stand separate but that you could use with the deck or use with any traditional tarot deck so that a person could do readings for themselves. Mm-hmm. Because there's so much literature on tarot, and some of it is absolutely fabulous. Some of it is mediocre, and some of it, frankly, I think no one should read. Right. And you can spend all your life studying this very deep topic and never feel, if you don't get in touch with the right sources, you can spend a lot of time and never feel like you actually are able to read for yourself and for those that you care about. So that was my ultimate goal when I set out. Well, when I finished the Kingdom Within Tarot and I put it out there, which, by the way, in the Kingdom Within Tarot and in the Alchemy of Tarot, which has a whole chapter on astrology and tarot and the deeper meanings, and has an entire health section, I quickly realized on the other side of the deck that even though I knew how to use the deck I'd put out for health, and even though I had I could teach individuals that I was working with how to use it for health and wellness, the tarot itself, there needed to be a broader exploration, because it is so brass tacks, because it is so many people think black and white, and because many people are confused about the juxtaposition of the body, the mind, and the spirit, and using those all together. People tend to focus on either the spirit or the emotions or the body, but it's very difficult and kind of takes a finesse to be able to use all of them together. I decided, you know what I really need is a deck that just focuses on the healing meanings. And so that's how it came about. I actually had never intended to make another tarot deck because I thought the Kingdom Within Tarot did it all. But on the other side of it, I realized, no, I think I think everyone would be served, including myself, just through going through the process itself of creating the deck. If in creating a deck with, I'm not an illustrator. I'm a tarot reader, and so I always collaborate with an illustrator. The Healing Tarot, my collaborator was Monica Knighton, who I don't know how many people are familiar with her work, but she's an incredible artist. She did the Tarot of the Dead, which is based on the Day of the Dead in Mexico and in the Latin American countries. And it's a wonderful deck that Llewellyn published a few years back. And then she just recently completed a Kickstarter project using a Yeats poem, and it was for a Major Arcana tarot deck that was called, okay, I hope I get this right, the Stolen Child Tarot, I believe. I believe that's what it was called. It's wonderful. I just don't have it right in front of me, so I'm not remembering the name for sure. Anyway, I collaborated with her, and one of the things that was important to me was I wanted this tarot deck to be in black and white rather than color, because just about every tarot deck is in color, and color is a wonderful part of our lives, but the more you add to the images, the more confusing they can become in interpreting. And I really felt that I wanted to get back to the symbols themselves as being the primary image. And if someone wants, they can, of course, color the deck. But I wanted them to come back and look only at the imagery and not at the colors. And so Monica was right on board, and she did these wonderful, whimsical line art drawings to go along with, honestly, a very in-depth book that I've written to go along with it. Is that a good introduction?
That's a very good introduction. Okay. Where did your interest in the tarot come from, and then in healing as well, because one kind of went along with the other, didn't it? Absolutely.
I was raised in a traditional fundamentalist Christian church. I have a degree. My original bachelor's was a triple bachelor's, but the one of them was in biblical studies in all of the Judeo-Christian background. So in the Bible, in Hebrew, and also in the Islamic Muslim Quran. And from there, I experimented with ceremonial magic, paganism, Wiccanism. I studied with Indian leaders, and I've gotten into yoga. And what happened was I walked into a metaphysical bookstore one day that was local, and I had never experimented with tarot at all. And I saw a deck laying on the shelf, and it just called to me. And so I picked it up and I bought it, and while I was buying it, got into a conversation with the owner of the bookstore. And she said, well, if you really want to learn, you need to study with a master. And they had two masters, but the one I chose to study with had a strong Aleister Crowley and Golden Dawn background in the tarot, as well as astrology. And so I had a very in-depth introduction to tarot that I think a lot of people don't have the opportunity, because I studied with this man for, a long time. And then from there branched out on my own and studied with different people. I've had the delight of working with such people as Mary Greer and Rachel Pollack, but Lon Milo Duquette wrote the introduction to my book. But all of this different experience has really been slowly engendering a tarot practice for myself.
Well, Mary Greer is a wonderful person. I had her on my show a few weeks ago.
Yeah, she is a delight.
She is. She really is.
And she really knows her stuff. Her mind and she's so collegiate in her approach to tarot, and I've always appreciated that so much.
Yeah, I was like sitting here thinking, oh God, am I the worst slacker in the world compared to her, because she is that good. It just pops right out. And she's so comfortable with it. And she would be a wonderful teacher. I know that.
She is.
All right. Now, as I mentioned before we started, since Schiffer didn't have the deck is so new, they didn't have anything to send out.
It's not out till the 28th. I only have my advanced copy that they sent straight from the house where they print it out. That's all I have. So yes, it's not available yet. Yeah, but you can pre-order it from the publisher or Amazon. They'll let it out on the 28th of May.
Right.
They say.
They will. Amazon is good about that, and so is Schiffer.
Oh,
so I as I explained, I'm going to be asking you probably the flying by the seat of my pants questions because I don't have it in front of me. But, the first obvious question is, are the cards and the suits, and I think I know this answer because I looked, but anyway, are the cards and the suits the same as a regular tarot deck, or are there some different cards added as well?
Nope. It's basically, I wanted this to be something that an experienced tarot reader could use to build in their current practice. I wasn't inventing a new system. What I was doing was bringing together all of the information from sources like astrology, Kabbalah, Aleister Crowley, Frater Akkad, the Golden Dawn, all the different places that have written, Dion Fortune, that have written about the healing aspects of the tarot, and bring it all together in one format. Now, obviously, I'm in there. Anytime an author writes, you're going to get their perspective and their truths in the process of all of the rest. But it was not my goal to be. It was my goal to form more of a practical synthesis, rather than create a whole new system that might confuse people. Mm-hmm. That are current. So like the images themselves, they're all whimsical takeoffs of what you probably know, the most traditional tarot deck in the world, the Rider-Waite. Right. That's what most people use. So with very few variation, like for example, our Fool. If you were to look at our Fool, it's very much like the traditional Rider-Waite Fool, only we've made changes that are all health related in the images and that all have to do with what the card means with regards to health. And for example, in the place of the dog is a hot dog with legs. That's the whimsical part. Both Monica and I have sort of we have a funny bone, and we enjoy using it, and it was definitely throughout this entire deck. But you also see, for example, in the image, you see power lines. You see a sign that says caution. He's holding a cell phone. He's dropping a book that says, diet tips or something like that. But otherwise, he's a little overweight. But it's very much a normal tarot, Rider-Waite tarot image, basically. So a person that is used to the Rider-Waite or used to traditional tarot will come to this and not be confused, as you can be with some new systems. Well, yeah. And a lot of people are confused just with tarot decks to begin with. Now, one thing that you mentioned earlier, and I think we should talk about that now, is that you want people to learn to do their own readings. Let's clarify that you have nothing against professional readers per se, but you prefer to guide people towards never needing a professional reader again. In what ways is this more beneficial than when you do it yourself than to have someone else doing the reading? That's a really good question. I just want to preface it by saying you're absolutely right. I have the utmost respect for professional readers. And I am in no way saying that to me, a professional reader should be, and my idea is like going in for a tune-up. You occasionally when there's really a question that you don't trust yourself on, or when you've done your own readings and you know that you're missing something, I think that's like consulting an expert. That's when the professional reader could be called. But I've met far too many people who, because they have professional readers, they don't branch off themselves and teach themselves how to do their own readings. And honestly, professional readers are amazing, but there's also an intuitive truth that only we can discover from within that I think the tarot deck is meant to uncover for each one of us. And so it's a tool not just for a professional, it's a tool for everyone. And so my goal and what I do occasionally do readings for friends and things like that, but overall, my tarot practice and the books I've written have been deliberately written so that a person can learn tarot and do tarot for themselves. So, for example, a lot of times in the books that come along with a tarot deck, you get the basics. And you may get the upright reading or the reversed readings, but they're very basic. Mine are very long and very in-depth. I get into how to read tarot, and in my broader exploration, the alchemy of tarot, I get into some very complex spreads and talk about how to interpret and what is the fine line between educating oneself and using your intuition. And so I think that's my goal. So like this book, the book that comes with this tarot, this deck, you could do all your own health readings and you would never need a professional reader. Now, there could come a time when you do a reading with this, you read it, and either A, you don't want to accept what it says, and so you need someone else to say it to you, or B, there's enough conflicting information that you're not sure how to fine-tune or how to find the source. In that situation, that's when I think you should turn to a professional reader if you're in that situation. But what a lot of people do is they never do readings for themselves. They just constantly get professional readings. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is actually it's a disservice to the person themselves.
Well, I've heard from a lot of people, though, that they don't want to read themselves. And as you said, maybe because they're either too close to the situation or afraid that if they see something they don't like, they will change the initial interpretation into something they like better. How do you address that when people say something like that they can't?
In the Bible, it says, and I am not a traditional Christian at all, but in the Bible, it says that each of us is to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. Now, that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. But what I understand that to be saying is that each of us is responsible for our own journey towards enlightenment. Each of us is responsible for working out our life, for taking responsibility for our life as it is, and for taking it wherever we feel or know that it should go. And the tarot is a tool for opening one's eyes to the truth. That is its fundamental ability. Yes, it's good, and there are necessary times when a person needs to go to an expert to open their eyes. There are definitely times, as in the deck itself, there are times it will say, go to a professional. That's what you need.
Get a second opinion. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's there. There are cards that mean that. But it is more important, and a life that's well lived with one's eyes open, that ends at a place of wholeness and authentic experience, is one where a person works to open their own eyes and is not dependent on others or an outside source for truth. So to those people I say, I would recommend that while you go to professional readers, you study the tarot and you do readings on your own, and maybe even form some close friendships with people who are at your ability level where you can encourage each other together so that you can start to use this profound tool to create the life that you are seeking and not just rely on experts.
Well, that's really good advice. But I also know that a lot of people are afraid to pick up a tarot deck because there are too many cards. I'm quoting. Too many cards. Then you have to learn the reversals. And then you have to learn the spreads. And that, people just think it's way too much work. And, in fact, it isn't necessarily, but
if you were to pick up either of my tarot decks, the King and Within Tarot or the Healing Tarot, it explains everything in a very simple form, both uprights and reversals. You can go as deep as you want by reading my larger book, but honestly, if you are afraid of tarot, I would start with a good tarot deck that has a book that explains everything. For example, I'm going to pick up the Healing Tarot. I'm just going to flip to, here's the Hangman. Now, I'm just reading from the book. In the Hangman, there's a large section at the beginning, which is for spiritual study, health from a spiritual perspective with regards to the Hangman. Then I mention the astrological connections, which is something to use. But then I have the traditional interpretation, the upright health meaning, and the reversed health meaning. The reason I have the traditional interpretation is because I think any deck, including this deck, should be able to use for non-health meanings as well. And so for people that need it, I have the traditional interpretation in there so that if they have a non-health question, they can still use this deck.
Okay.
But here's an example of the upright health meaning for the Hanged Man. This is for a person that knows nothing about tarot. After reading this, I don't think that they're going to need more. So let me just, you tell me.
Yeah.
The Hangman suggests that your concept of the universe hinges on what you want to be so, irrespective of what is factual. It is critical that you look very closely at your real circumstances. Be careful not to make up fictions about your own health and believe them without also considering the medical facts. If poorly aspected, which I explain how to interpret poor aspects versus good aspects in the introduction. And it's very simple. Mm-hmm. This card warns that you are making purely emotional decisions with no basis in reality. Something is hidden about an illness you have. It may be difficult to diagnose or treat, be weakening or debilitating, or have no apparent cure. If poorly aspected, it suggests diseases of the lymphatic system, feet, right hemisphere of the brain, and thalamus. Also may suggest drowning. The hangman suggests you have problems distinguishing between your inner world and the world around you, therefore warns of problems with sleeping and insanity, as well as alcohol or drug problems, dependence, addiction, poisoning, lying about them, hiding them, as well as using them to avoid the painful truths of your health and life. If very poorly aspected, you are deceiving yourself and or others for your own selfish purposes. Something that you consider essential must be sacrificed to buy improved health. If poorly aspected, you may be sacrificing yourself for a false hope, dream, or in the belief that it will help another person. Re-examine this sacrifice. Is the outcome really worth the cost? Turn your world upside down. Be imaginative and consider new vantage points, perhaps even those that you've dismissed as crazy in the past, on your way to wellness. Mm-hmm. So that's a very in-depth upright meaning. And then there's a reversed health meaning as well. So,
do you, like some people with the reverse meanings, they'll take the upright meaning and just turn it kind of a negative spin on it. Is that the way you interpret your reversals?
No, although I have no problem with a person interpreting them that way. I am based in astrology and Kabbalah. And from that viewpoint, a reversal is viewed as a planet in retrograde in astrology, which means when a planet is in retrograde, the energy is trapped within and unable to manifest or come out. So upright meanings are it's around you, it's already coming or has come out of you, or it's surrounding you. A reverse meaning is it's trapped within you, it's in your internal world. For some reason, you can't manifest it, or it's brooding, or you haven't given birth to it yet, just like a retrograde planet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. We were talking about spreads, and we've got a couple of questions from the chat room. Kat is wondering, are the spreads, layouts, etc. really necessary? Seems to me the individual cards alone have a great deal of interpretations possible.
Oh, there's a very good point to that. And I would like to talk about spreads for a moment.
Good, because I was going to bring that up.
I began with just the simple Celtic cross spread in my own tarot journeys, which basically covers every aspect of a person. I mean, every aspect of a situation. I branched off personally, and as I was going through the tarot and learning it in depth, I found one card draws to be incredibly profound. But sometimes you need more information. Sometimes it's especially in a complex question, or when you have a lot of different aspects to it, you need more information. Then it helps to pull a card for each aspect of the situation. I personally do not think you have to follow the spreads that I have suggested in the back of the book. I'm personally into learn the tarot and do basic spreads. It's really fun to be creative with spreads, and sometimes I really have fun experimenting with the spreads others have created. But my goal is practicality, and so I'm careful not to add too much. So I have 3 spreads in the book. One is an acute illness spread, which basically is a 4-card draw that you use to understand an illness that has set upon you. For example, a cold, a flu. This is not for chronic illnesses, and this is not for unknown illnesses. This is just something you have that you want to know, how am I going to get better? Mm-hmm. What is it? Do I need to go to the doctor? Those sorts of questions. Then I have a broader exploration, which I call the Healthy Zodiac spread. And it's a 12-card draw. Each one of the cards corresponds in some way to one of the 12 houses of the Zodiac. And that basically is to cover your health as a whole and answer all the questions. For example, they're like, what is my overall health? How is my diet affecting my health? What is the inherited health tendencies, et cetera, et cetera. And each one corresponds to one of the houses. And then the last spread I do is a diet and fitness spread. It is actually probably the most difficult spread to do, totally unnecessary if you don't want to. However, when you're trying to start something new, when you're trying to make changes that are going to be life changes, so that you improve your health, and you're not coming so much from a place of lack as much as you're coming from a place of goals. Sometimes we need help setting goals and figuring out what it is we need to focus on, and that spread's made for that, and it utilizes all parts of the tarot deck in the process. Now, those are the 3 spreads that I include, but you could just do a 1-card draw, like what is my health meaning for the day, and pull what I need to focus on. And there is so much in this book and in these cards that you'll get plenty to focus on for that day. It really depends. In fact, sometimes when I have to do, like, let's say I'm going to a mechanic. This is not a health meeting, but let's say I'm going to a mechanic, and I need to know, is he a good mechanic? I do a 1-card draw. And if that's not there, then I do a larger tarot spread.
Right. Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. Everybody's got, everybody starts Celtic Cross, everybody starts with past, present, future, the 1-card draws. Right. And people, honestly, they read a book that says these are the spreads that you need to use, rather than accepting them as, okay, this is great if I want to, but let me experiment and see what works for me.
And yes, and experimentation is essential. This is how I view it. There's the basics, and you go back to the basics when you're at a place of doubt in your life. But when you're having fun, experiment, try new things, make up your own readings. You don't have to stick with a pattern. They really are just different creative ways to bring you into seeing what you already knew about your life anyway, but for some reason weren't looking at.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, in school we're taught by the book. This is how you have to do things. So if somebody is new to tarot and picks up, a how-to book or a deck with the booklet enclosed, we have that mentality that, this is how it needs to be done, and we're afraid to veer off.
I can remember I was at LATS, which is the LA Tarot Symposium, and I remember the woman who runs the Bay Area Tarot Symposium, her name's Thalassa. She was doing a class, and I was just beginning in tarot. I'd maybe been doing it a couple years. I remember she picked up a tarot deck. She took out those little white booklets, and she walked over and she threw it in the trash. She said, never pay attention to these again. This is what I think of that. And I remember at that time I was like, really? I can do that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's what we're kind of like Pavlov's dogs in certain aspects.
That's exactly right.
We do what we're told, but that's part of, you were talking about living in the black and white. Well, I always live in the gray, and I've said this 1,000 times, and people are going to go, there she goes again talking about the gray. But it's true. And so if you're only going in black and white, you miss a whole lot. And we have this innate ability in all of us to expand our horizons, to experiment and grow and learn, and it doesn't always have to be on that one path.
Well, you know what? You are the expert on you. No one else is the expert on you. I'm the expert on me. You're the expert on you. We can go for help to others, but ultimately it comes down to determining our own experiences and our own truth.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And, how often do you agree with everybody that you meet 100%?
I hope not.
God. No, that would be really scary. That I'm glad you're talking about spreads and that, because I think, again, that, in addition to the number of cards, is something that keeps people away from the tarot, afraid to learn, afraid to grab. And, it's the same thing, too, that we tell people all the time that, yes, okay, look at the explanations of each card, read them and just kind of get an idea of what that is. But there's nothing better than to pick up a card and look at it and let it speak to you and tell you what it means.
It's a profound experience the first time a tarot card speaks to you. Mm-hmm. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important that people know that, and it takes away the fear factor. It brings out the creativeness in it, because a lot of us, especially, people with 9-to-5 jobs and regular jobs, are just not creative. You do everything by rote. And if you do everything by rote in your life, you kind of forget that you can veer and you can change things up. So being able to grab a deck and interpret it yourself and get the message from the cards and do your own spreads, it is really freeing in a sense.
That's an excellent point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important. All right, we have another question from chat. And she wants to know, as a Christian, wait a minute, let me try to read this again. As a Christian, how does Marla get rid of the feeling of the negative stigma that is put on tarot? Well, I'm a pagan, and so there isn't any negative stigma and not supposed to be predicting the future. I don't know. You were brought up in the fundamentalist Christian. Why don't you answer that too?
That's an excellent question. And for example, the first time I ever came in contact with the tarot deck, I had been trained that it was evil and of the devil. And I'm talking the very first time. And I've met some people who I can pull out a very positive card, and their reaction is, because of the training that they've had, that it's evil. Then they'll say, "Oh, that's evil. I can't touch it." And okay, I think that there's truth, and then there's brainwashing, and a deck is just a deck. It's a pack of cards that was printed generally in China, but it could have been printed anywhere. And it has images on it. And if a person looks through the images, the vast majority of them are very pleasant. There are some that are dark and negative in meaning. But I think what we really get into with divining, and by the way, if the person is really serious and seeking, and perhaps they're coming from a fundamental Christian or Judeo-Christian background, and or they may know people that are asking this question, in my book, The Alchemy of Tarot, I have a very considerable look where I break down where tarot comes from. Is it evil? Looking at the background of people that believe that tarot is evil. And I would recommend, because that's not the purpose of this show, this is focusing on healing. I've already written it and I've already said it. Look in my book and you will find it. It's in The Alchemy of Tarot. However, just in the short, I am not as concerned with the pack of cards that have images on them being evil as I am the heart of the person that's interpreting them and where they're getting their source. Mm-hmm. And we could get into a large discussion about evil and the nature of evil and truth.
Yes, we could.
And I suspect that were that what I was focusing on, I could lead the conversation through to the point that the writer would be, the person that asked the question, would be comfortable with where I'm coming from with regards to tarot and evil, as I've done with other fundamentalist friends of mine, my mother, for example. But because I don't have that kind of time, and because that's not what I prepared for, I really have healing right now, But I will say that I look at the source, and I would recommend to the writer that if they're concerned, they actually do a word study if they want to use their Bible, or if they want to, whether they're Islam, Jewish, or Christian, I don't know, but that they would want to do a word study in the actual original Hebrew and Greek words that have to do with divining and soothsaying, and look at those scriptures for themselves. And I think that they'll find that it's a little surprising that what people have told them is not what's actually written in their holy book. But beyond that, I would tell them to look for themselves rather than coming from a place of fear. And if they are personally uncomfortable with it, then it's probably not something for them right now. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that it can't be for someone else. Right. However, without getting into any further than that, look at the exploration in my book, because it's pretty thorough.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer, and I mean it was a good question, because there are people out there. Many people feel that any form of divination is Satan induced. Telling the future and all that. And it's very difficult to dance around that. It's very difficult to convince somebody that doesn't want to be convinced. But I just hope that people have open minds about things, and not everything written on paper is true, and trust your gut and do what's right for you. That's, we've all got some good basic morals, and there are lines that we're not going to cross no matter what. So use those as your stepping stone, and don't necessarily... Oh, I'm going to get in trouble now. Don't necessarily believe the dogma that has been pounded into you for years and years and years. I mean, because ultimately, the dogma does not protect anyone, whether it's Wiccan dogma or Christian dogma or atheist dogma. It doesn't matter. Dogma does not protect you from ultimately being responsible for your own life. Right. And so you have to take, as an individual, responsibility for knowing your own truth and understanding why you believe what you believe. And there are many roads to, in fact, that's one of Aleister Crowley's most beautiful, profound things he ever wrote, is that there are many roads to finding enlightenment and truth. But what your goal, as Joseph Campbell would say, is to find your path, is to find your hero's journey. And your hero's journey is not someone else's.
And so what concerns me about the question is that they're being taught things are wrong rather than looking at it themselves and determining their own truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, I just think it's really important to do that. Okay, now let's switch over a little bit because you talk about what you consider to be the fundamental question, which is how do we heal?
That's right.
So how do we heal?
Well, first of all, that question is not one that I can answer on a radio show. But that's why I made a tarot deck and a book, because the process of healing involves so many different parts. We are multidimensional beings from some perspectives, from my perspective, and we are so complex, and there's so much going on at a cellular level all the way up to a universal level and healing involves all parts of a man or woman. And so this deck, and the reason I wrote it, the reason that it comes such a substantial companion book to help one use the deck, it is all about discovering healing from all aspects, from not just body, not just mind, and not just spiritual, which a lot of people separate the body and the mind from the spiritual when they speak of healing. They're either speaking of healing the body and the mind, or they're speaking of healing the spirit, as though those two things can ever really be separated when one is attached to a body. But it also focuses on emotional healing, which I think is profoundly important, and healing of community. Because one of the things that also happens is we are individuals, but we are also part of a community. And when the community is ailing, the individual ails. And when the individual is ailing, the community is affected. And so this book gets into all of the different aspects of healing. And there is so much profound teaching in the tarot and in Kabbalah and in astrology and in the archetypes and in mythology that leads us this direction. And this was just my attempt to bring it all together into one work.
Yeah, because people think I'm sick. Okay, well, you're sick. Is it physical? Are your, emotions bringing on the sickness? I mean, there's so many different factors there.
Yes, and the deck approaches it from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important. I've got another chat room question. They want to know what you would suggest for someone who has difficulties remembering all of the meanings of the cards.
I would just use the book, because then you don't have to remember anything. If we're talking about healing meanings, if we're talking about a person who wants to learn tarot for themselves so they can read professionally or read for friends, that's something else. But for a person who can't remember, write everything down or tape record it if you get a professional reading so that you can remember everything that way. And use the book. Underline the book. Write in the book. Keep track of the tarot readings you do for yourself and write down what you got personally out of, like, for example, let's say that you get the Emperor upright and you read all of the interpretation, but what really strikes you is one particular line. Write that down and the date. I keep track of readings that matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I also need to memorize.
Yeah, go ahead. Exactly.
I was just going to say that way you don't need to.
Well, yeah, and I've noticed, when I started reading, that certain cards immediately jumped out. Mm-hmm. They were so much easier to remember. And someone has said, too, and I'm not necessarily jumping at that, but there are some people who only start out with the major arcana because those seem to be, for them, the easiest ones to absorb or understand. How do you feel about people that just read with the major arcana? Do you think the major arcana is more important than the minor arcana and the court cards?
I think major and minor is a bit of a misnomer. Mm-hmm. However, I think you can do a darn good reading with just major arcana cards. Mm-hmm. I think there are some things that aren't in the majors that are explored in the courts and the minors. So, and I think what the courts and the minors do, I think the courts actually, most people find the court cards the most confusing. But out of the three, it seems like most people that I teach, the majors and the minors they can get a handle on, but the courts, that's their struggle. Which is, I tried to really simplify courts for this so that a person, even if they confuse them, they can still understand how to do it. But basically, the major arcana cards express the pure energy of one of the 10 planets or 12 signs of the zodiac. So from that viewpoint, all of the energies that astrologically speaking are in existence are in the major arcana cards. So I think you can do an excellent reading with just majors. But the minor arcana cards explore the key planet and sign combinations. And that's important because that gets more brass tacks about day-to-day life. So you'll get more answers. The major arcana cards will give you the big answers. But if you have a small question, you don't necessarily need a big answer to it. That's where the minors really come in handy. And the court cards, they are a very interesting mix because they reveal the dynamic combination of the 4 elements, fire, water, air, and earth, with the 3 ways that energy expresses itself in the universe, which is start, change, and stop. And the 3 categories of the astrological signs, which are cardinal, mutable, and fixed, as well as revealing specific people in our lives. So it really depends what the reading's on. There are readings you can do with just quartz, and it will be excellent. If you're asking about a specific person in your life and you want to know what kind of an impact they're going to have on your life, just use your quartz cards. So for the big things, I say majors. For the day-to-day drudgery, I say minors. And for people in your life, or to understand how something is manifesting, where it's coming from, how quickly it will come, I look at the quartz. So it really depends. But you can definitely start with the majors. I started my study with the majors.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of people do. As I said, sometimes they're easier. And if you hand somebody a deck of 20 cards, as opposed to a deck of, 50 whatever, or 72 whatever, it's going to make it easier once you get comfortable.
Then
with
you
the
can
major
add
arcana.
more. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
a suit at a time.
I say
whatever.
a card a day. I say that you can learn learn the tarot in 78 days.
Okay, well, you can. If you're diligent, it's good.
Yes.
But some people aren't diligent. And again, it's very off-putting to some.
Yeah.
Because it seems like such a trial. I mean, it means like going to school and studying and all that. But
I want you to know that you never have to learn tarot if you have one of the decks I've written, because I've done it all for you. So if you just want to do readings for yourself, you can, just with the deck and the book. It explains everything, and it's very simple and practical.
And that's how it should be, or that's how it should be looked at. Not as, because, okay, one thing I really dislike, and I've gotten several decks because Schiffer sends me decks from time to time because they know that's what I do. And I really, and not just Schiffer, but I really dislike the decks that give you the little explanation down at the bottom. The keywords or something, because...
Oh, on the actual image?
Yeah.
Oh.
It just throws you off because somebody's going to interpret one word as something or something else, but in my opinion, it blocks you. It blocks you from getting the real meaning that is coming through because you're looking and focusing on this card means this, That's my pet peeve, I think, about decks, even though they're meant to be helpful.
When I first learned tarot, one of the things, there's a lot of different steps that I went through with my master, but one of the things I did was actually type out keywords and put them on a card, and I call on a tarot deck, basically ruining the tarot deck. But I needed that personally because I wanted to get to the point that I didn't need a book to do tarot readings. And I wanted to get to the point where but I also come from a discipline that I want to understand everything there is about the tarot and approach it with my own intuition, my own moments of aha and brilliance, when spirit speaks directly to and through me. And so that's where I came from. However, a good tarot deck, the images are sufficient. Not all tarot decks are good, though. And so the images aren't sufficient. We've seen those. We've seen decks where you look at a card and you're like, oh, I don't even know what this is showing, Right. So, and that could just be, it may be an excellent card and it's not meant for you. I mean, that's very possible. But let's be honest, with a lot of the art decks that have come out, meaning has fallen aside, and instead we get a beautiful interpretation that's kind of loosey-goosey and we may not actually know what to do with it. So we have the full spectrum out there in tarot decks. I agree.
It's true. And, the other thing, too, is when you're working with an artist, because I've got an oracle deck coming out and I can't draw stick figures, so that was great. But before we got together, we talked about interpretation. We talked about things that we see, the visuals, the imagination, and everything. And she's wonderful. I mean, we were on the same wavelength. And then she is not pagan, so some of the things I have in that deck she may not understand. So we talk about them first before she goes ahead and draws a picture or, just kind of guesses at it. And so it's very important to have an artist and an author on the same page, on the same wavelength, and that way it makes the cards so much more meaningful, I think.
Oh, it's critical. I have been so very lucky in the two illustrators I worked with, Shannon Thornfeather and Monica Knight, and they've both been, because I'm so particular. I come and I have huge paragraphs for each card. All of these things must be on this card. And they just come with it, come back, and it's just brilliant and beautiful and truly channeled.
Yeah, I know the first time she sent me a sample, I sent her 3 cards to do, and she sent me a sample, and it was one of those chin-dropping moments. Mm-hmm. That this is perfect. This is exactly, and she asked the right questions. How do you feel about color? What spectrum in the color things do you like? And she knew all the right questions. And at that moment, I felt blessed because. Oh yes,
there's a reason to use a professional illustrator if you're not, because they bring such a richness that you may not envision at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's absolutely key to a good deck, and conversely, it will make the reading of the deck for people that are using it so much better too, because you feel that kind of good stuff pouring out of the cards. It's not like, somebody just printed it on a printing press and just, picked up some clip art and stuck it on there. Right. I think the cards do speak to you, and if they have a really good basis, I think that good feeling in the cards comes through. It's almost, in a sense, like a blessing, although we're not blessing every deck that comes out, but it's that kind of thing, and I think that's really, really an important thing. And also, as we were talking about earlier, choosing your deck. Don't pick up the first deck that you start with. When I started, everybody says use Rider Waite, got to do Rider Waite. And I looked through a bunch of decks, and actually Robin Wood stuck out for me.
I love the Robin Wood deck. That was one of my first decks, too.
Yeah, but everybody's saying, no, you got to use Rider Waite. No, you don't have to. So you have to look at decks. I think it's important to go into a shop that sells them so you can hold them and look at them rather than on the internet necessarily. You can get a good feeling about that, too. But they do call to you. And, I've gotten some decks that have come through in the review process that I've just looked at and just shook my head and thought, there's no way. I'm not even going to delve any deeper than opening this box, because it was just so kind of, not abhorrent, that's maybe an exaggeration of the term, but it's like, oh no, I can't use these. And fortunately, I have a friend who collects decks, and so here's another one for your collection. But on
that though, I have to say, and yet tarot, even done poorly or done for someone completely different than you or I, who has completely different sensibilities and aesthetics, you can still have those moments where you pick up a deck that doesn't speak to you at all, but you're desperate for a reading. You pull out and put out the cards, and magic happens. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of the synchronicity and all the layers and the archetypes and all that is in tarot, is that there is a synchronicity in reading that even with a bad deck, or even with a deck that's lesser, let's say, that doesn't speak to you, you can still reach profound truths because of all that's behind it.
True.
Although I wouldn't buy it.
But if it was a gift, you wouldn't give it back either. Yeah.
Or if I was in a store and I needed a quick read.
Well, sometimes people make up their own decks, and every card, we don't recognize the suits, we don't recognize the cards, we don't recognize anything. Those are kind of crazy to read. And maybe somebody that's a really good reader can take that and turn it around. I'm not going to do that, because I just go with what I'm comfortable with. I'm a lazy witch. What am I going to tell you?
And our decks reflect us. So, people that are into vampires love vampire decks. People that are very steeped in archetypes prefer prefer Crowley or some of the deeper, really what people consider the more difficult decks to read with. It's very individual. Some people love happy decks, and so they're going to end up with Hanson Roberts, and that's great.
Yeah, exactly. And I really champion people that use the more difficult decks, because it works for them, and it's perfect. But again, choose your deck carefully, or more importantly, let it choose you. Now we've got a couple of minutes left, so before we get cut off, I want you to let people know where they can find out more about you, your books, your decks, all that good stuff.
Okay. We have the Healing Tarot has a website and from there you can hook up to the Facebook page, which basically we do not a card every day, but we occasionally look at cards. I'd say 2 or 3 a week, where we show the image and then the short discussion of the healing meaning, and it also updates people. Though our website is thehealingtarot, all lowercase.com. Also, the deck comes out on May 28th, knock on wood, supposing everything goes well. And if you pre-order now, you can get it on basically any major retailer. Schiffer, my publisher, from their website, they sell it. It's also available for pre-order from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the Tarot Garden, any of the tarot retailers you probably know and love do sell it, because Schiffer's basically out there, and their tarot decks are everywhere.
Yes.
And I don't really know what else to answer that question, but that's how I would get a hold of me. I also, there's a separate Facebook page for the Kingdom Within Tarot and the Alchemy of Tarot. They're linked because they came out within a month of each other. Wow. And you just would look up the Kingdom Within Tarot on Facebook, and that is, now Shannon does a daily card draw with that. And then I make notes and say different things as well. So. Mm-hmm. And that deck is also available from Schiffer or anywhere. It's been out for a little over a year and a half now. Year and a half.
Well, that's the good thing about Schiffer. They don't pull merchandise after 6 months like some publishers do.
That's true.
So we can always find our stuff, when we're old and gray, somewhere on somebody's bookshelf there will be, in the store, there will be the books. They're still available. So that's really good. Well,
and if they're interested in a deeper look at tarot, I really do recommend picking up The Alchemy of Tarot, which is the book, which basically says everything. And that if you really do want to get into tarot deeply, I would check it out. Sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I want you to stay on the line so we can thank you properly when we're done. But again, thank you for joining us, and I want to thank everybody else that popped in tonight. And we've got some really good stuff coming up in the next few weeks, so tune in because you'll be pleasantly surprised. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.